Flight attendant Vanessa slapped 17-year-old Zoe across the face, calling her, just another privileged black brat. Passengers gasp as Zoe whispers into her phone, "Daddy, by this airline." Now. Blood trickles from her lip. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination on public transportation, and subscribe to hear more stories about justice being served. Now, let's find out how this explosive confrontation began. Zoe Washington had everything most teenagers could only dream of: a sprawling mansion in the hills of Los Angeles, designer clothes filling her walk-in closets, and access to private jets whenever she desired. But none of that mattered to her as much as her father's wisdom. Lawrence Washington wasn't just any billionaire. As the founder and CEO of Washington Technologies, he had revolutionized cloud computing and cybersecurity, amassing a fortune of $32 billion. But Lawrence never forgot his humble beginnings in Baltimore, where he'd faced discrimination and poverty before coding his way to success. "Money can buy you comfort, Zoe," he often told his daughter, "but it can't buy you respect. That's something you earn by how you treat others, and something you demand when others mistreat you." Zoe had absorbed these lessons deeply. Despite attending Westfield Academy, one of the most exclusive private schools in the country, she remained grounded. She drove a modest electric car rather than the Lamborghini her father offered for her 16th birthday. She volunteered teaching coding to underprivileged kids every weekend. And she worked harder than anyone to prove her intelligence and worth. Because Zoe knew something her wealthy classmates didn't: being rich didn't protect her from racism. As one of only 8 black students at Westfield, she constantly faced microaggressions. Teachers expressed surprise at her academic excellence. Classmates touched her hair without permission. Security guards followed her in the school's own bookstore. "It doesn't matter what's in your bank account," her father had explained after a particularly painful incident at a country club when she was 12. "Some people will only see your skin color. Handle it with dignity, but never with submission." These experiences had shaped Zoe into someone extraordinary, brilliant, compassionate, and wise beyond her 17 years. Her true passion was aviation engineering. While other teens decorated their rooms with celebrity posters, Zoe's walls displayed aircraft schematics and aerodynamic calculations. She had already designed several innovations to improve passenger safety, including an enhanced oxygen mask deployment system that a major manufacturer was considering implementing. This passion for flight was precisely why, despite her father's objections, Zoe had insisted on taking a commercial flight to visit MIT. The prestigious university had invited her to participate in their special summer engineering program for exceptional high school students. "I could send the private jet, Zoe," Lawrence had argued. "It's safer, more comfortable." "That's exactly why I need to fly commercial, Dad," she had countered. "How can I revolutionize passenger experience if I never experience it as a passenger? I need to observe everything: boarding procedures, seat comfort, service flow, safety demonstrations. It's research." Reluctantly, Lawrence agreed, but with conditions. Diana Chen, Zoe's personal assistant, would accompany her. The 28-year-old former Marine had worked for the Washington family for 3 years and was as protective of Zoe as an older sister. "Fine, but Diana sits in first class," Zoe had insisted, surprising both her father and assistant. "I need to be in economy to get the full experience. That's where most innovation is needed anyway." As the black town car pulled up to the airport terminal, Diana gave Zoe a concerned look. "Are you sure about this? Your father would upgrade you in a heartbeat." Zoe adjusted her simple jeans and MIT sweatshirt, deliberately understated attire. "I'm sure. Real engineers get their hands dirty understanding the problems they're trying to solve. Text me if you need me, but otherwise, let me do this my way." Diana nodded reluctantly. "Just remember our agreement: any trouble, any at all, and you text me immediately." Zoe smiled confidently. "It's just a 6-hour flight. What's the worst that could happen?" She had no idea that this simple research trip was about to become the most challenging test of her father's principles, and the spark for an industry-wide transformation. The bustling terminal of LAX was a stark contrast to the private hangars Zoe typically departed from. Standing in line at the security checkpoint, she observed everything with keen interest, jotting notes in the small leather-bound notebook her mother had given her before passing away 3 years ago from cancer. "Excuse me," the TSA agent said, frowning at Zoe's passport and boarding pass. "Are you sure you're in the right line? This is for Group C boarding." "Yes, I'm aware," Zoe replied politely. The agent glanced at her expensive watch, a graduation gift from her father, and then back at her economy boarding pass with obvious suspicion. "I'll need to verify this. Step aside please." Zoe noticed the white businessman behind her was waved through without a second glance despite carrying virtually identical documentation. It was a familiar experience, but she remained calm as the agent called a supervisor. After a 10-minute delay and several unnecessary questions, Zoe was finally allowed to proceed to the boarding gate. Diana, who had been watching from a distance, texted, "Everything okay?" "Just the usual," Zoe replied. "Nothing I can't handle." Boarding the plane, Zoe immediately noticed the flight attendant greeting passengers, a tall woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her name tag reading, Vanessa Carpenter. She smiled warmly at the passengers ahead of Zoe, but when Zoe approached, the smile vanished. "Boarding pass," Vanessa demanded curtly, not making eye contact. Zoe provided it, noting the difference in treatment. This wasn't her imagination, the contrast was stark and immediate. 24B, middle seat. "Keep moving," Vanessa said, already looking past Zoe to the next passenger. Finding her row, Zoe settled between two other passengers, a white teenage boy who immediately plugged in his headphones and turned away, and a middle-aged Latina woman who smiled warmly. "First flight?" the woman asked kindly. "First commercial flight in a while," Zoe admitted. "I'm Zoe. Gabriela Rodriguez," the woman replied. "Don't worry, honey. 6 hours will pass before you know it." As other passengers boarded, Zoe continued her observations, sketching ideas for improved boarding procedures in her notebook. Her thoughts drifted to previous incidents of discrimination she'd faced, the time a teacher accused her of cheating because her physics paper was too advanced, the security guard who followed her through an upscale boutique, the neighbor who called police when she was simply jogging through her own neighborhood. Her reflection was interrupted when the drink service began. Vanessa moved methodically down the aisle, serving each passenger with professional efficiency, until she reached Zoe's row. "What would you like?" she asked Gabriela pleasantly. "Ginger ale, please," Gabriela replied. Vanessa poured it with a smile, then served the boy by the window. When she turned to Zoe, her demeanor changed. "We're running low on drinks," she said, despite the clearly well-stocked cart. "Water only." "Water is fine, thank you," Zoe replied, maintaining her composure. As Vanessa moved to the next row, a white businessman across the aisle caught Zoe's eye. Connor Anderson, according to the business card he'd been examining, worked for an investment firm. He'd clearly noticed the discrepancy in service. "That wasn't right," he said quietly to Zoe. "It happens," Zoe replied with a small shrug, appreciating his awareness. The flight continued, and Zoe's phone buzzed with a text from her father, "Great news. Preliminary talks with Coastal Airways looking promising. Board seems open to acquisition offer. How's the flight?" Zoe's eyes widened slightly. Her father had mentioned possibly acquiring a regional airline to test some of her safety innovations, but she hadn't realized Coastal Airways, the very airline she was currently flying, was the target. "Flight is educational," she texted back cryptically. "Learning a lot about customer service." A bout of turbulence suddenly rocked the plane, causing Vanessa to stumble slightly. The teenage boy beside Zoe jerked in surprise, knocking Zoe's arm and spilling water on his designer jeans. "What the hell?" he exclaimed, yanking off his headphones. I'm sorry, Zoe apologized immediately. The turbulence, you did that on purpose, the boy accused loudly. Tyler, I didn't, you know my name, he demanded, looking both angry and unnerved. Zoe pointed to his luggage tag clearly visible in the overhead bin, displaying, Tyler Brooks, in bold letters. Flight attendant. Tyler called out, waving frantically to Vanessa. This girl dumped water all over me. Have you ever witnessed someone being falsely accused? Comment number 1 if you've ever been in a situation where you were blamed for something you didn't do. Hit that like button if you believe Zoe is handling this situation with remarkable composure, and subscribe to see how this confrontation escalates. What would you do if you were in Zoe's position on this flight? Let's continue and see how the tension builds. Vanessa rushed over, her expression hardening as she looked from the water stain on Tyler's pants to Zoe's still partially filled cup. What happened here, she demanded, though her tone suggested she'd already decided who was at fault. She dumped her water on me on purpose, Tyler insisted, playing up his victimhood. Probably jealous of my new $300 jeans. That's not true, Zoe replied calmly. The turbulence caused his drink to spill. I was holding my cup steadily. Vanessa's eyes narrowed with obvious disbelief. Sir, I'm so sorry about this incident. Let me get you some club soda and a towel to clean that up. As Vanessa hurried away, Tyler smirked at Zoe. Nobody's going to believe you over me, you know that right? Connor Anderson, the businessman across the aisle, leaned forward. Actually, I saw the whole thing. The young lady is telling the truth. It was clearly an accident caused by turbulence. Vanessa returned with supplies for Tyler, her back turned completely to Zoe as she fussed over the teenager. Thank you for speaking up, Zoe said quietly to Connor. He shrugged. I can't stand injustice, no matter how small. I appreciate that, but I've learned to pick my battles, Zoe replied, remembering her mother Victoria's words during a similar incident at a restaurant years ago. Not every slight deserves your energy, Zoe, Victoria had told her. Save your strength for the battles that matter, the ones that can create real change. Zoe closed her eyes, missing her mother's wisdom and calming presence more than ever. Victoria Washington had been not just a loving mother but also a brilliant civil rights attorney who had taught Zoe to document everything and remain strategic. When she opened her eyes, she noticed another flight attendant, a young man whose name tag read, Michael Torres, watching the situation with concern. Their eyes met briefly, and Zoe could see he recognized the unfair treatment, but he quickly looked away, continuing his duties in the front cabin. Zoe pulled out her notebook again, adding observations about conflict resolution protocols on flights. Her academic approach to the situation helped her maintain composure, treating everything as data for her research rather than personal attacks. A message from Diana lit up her phone, everything still okay? Before Zoe could respond, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, folks, we're expecting some more turbulence ahead. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin. Vanessa began checking seatbelts, stopping at each row, except Zoe's. The oversight was obvious enough that Gabriella raised her hand. Excuse me, you didn't check our row, she pointed out. Vanessa barely glanced at them. Your seatbelts are visibly fastened. I'm focusing on rows that need attention. She moved on quickly, but not before Zoe noticed her checking the seatbelts of the entirely fastened row directly behind them. The passenger in front of Zoe suddenly reclined his seat all the way back, crushing Zoe's knees painfully against her tray table. Excuse me, sir, Zoe said politely, tapping his shoulder. Would you mind raising your seat a bit? I don't have any room for my legs. The man ignored her completely. Zoe pressed the call button, but after 5 minutes with no response, she pressed it again. Still nothing, though she noticed Vanessa responding promptly to call buttons in other rows. Unbelievable, Gabriella muttered under her breath. Tyler snickered. Maybe she's invisible. After 15 minutes, Zoe stood up carefully and walked to the galley where Vanessa was arranging meal trays. "Excuse me," Zoe said politely. "I pressed the call button twice but didn't get a response." Vanessa barely looked up. "I'm busy with meal preparation. What do you need?" "The passenger in front of me has reclined completely, and I wanted to ask if you could." "That's his right," Vanessa cut her off. "Each passenger can use their seat functions as they choose. But my knees are, if you wanted more legroom, you should have purchased premium economy or first class," Vanessa snapped, then added with a pointed look, "if you could afford it." The irony of the statement wasn't lost on Zoe, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you for your time," she said evenly, returning to her seat. As meal service began, Vanessa distributed trays efficiently until reaching Zoe. "I don't seem to have a meal for you," she said coldly. "I pre-ordered the vegetarian option when booking," Zoe explained. "There's no record of that," Vanessa insisted. "We're out of extra meals." Gabriella frowned. "That doesn't seem right. Can you check again?" "Ma'am, I've already checked," Vanessa replied curtly. Perhaps next time she'll remember to confirm her preferences properly. Zoe's stomach growled, but she simply nodded and pulled an energy bar from her bag. She'd faced worse than hunger before. This was just another data point for her research on improving passenger experience, and apparently, staff training. What she didn't know was that the real confrontation was still to come, and it would change not just her flight experience, but the entire airline industry. 3 hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed for passengers who wished to rest. Zoe continued working on her engineering sketches, using the small reading light above her seat. Across the aisle, Connor Anderson had fallen asleep, and beside her, Gabriella was watching a movie on her tablet. Tyler had been quiet since receiving preferential treatment from Vanessa, occasionally shooting smug glances in Zoe's direction. Feeling chilled from the cabin air conditioning, Zoe noticed several passengers with airline-provided blankets. She hadn't received one during boarding, so when she spotted Vanessa walking by with a stack of folded blankets, she raised her hand. "Excuse me," Zoe called softly. "Could I have a blanket, please?" Vanessa stopped abruptly, clutching the blankets to her chest. "These are for premium customers only," she stated firmly. Zoe blinked in confusion. "I just saw you give one to the gentleman in 22C, she pointed out. "He's in economy, same as me." Vanessa's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Are you accusing me of lying?" Her voice rose enough that several nearby passengers turned to look. "Not at all," Zoe replied calmly. "I was simply asking if a blanket is available. You know what I think?" Vanessa hissed, leaning closer. "I think you're trying to steal amenities meant for customers who actually pay for them." The accusation was so outlandish that Zoe momentarily lost her composure. "That's absurd. I just asked a simple question." Gabriella removed her headphones, sensing the tension. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Vanessa snapped. "Your seatmate is attempting to appropriate premium supplies." From his seat, Tyler snickered loudly. "Busted for blanket theft. That's a new low." Zoe took a deep breath, centering herself. "Never mind the blanket. I'm fine." But Vanessa wasn't ready to let it go. "I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again," she demanded. "I think you may not be in your assigned seat." "I've been sitting here the entire flight," Zoe replied, reaching for her phone to pull up her digital boarding pass. Before she could unlock her screen, Vanessa's attention shifted to Zoe's carry-on bag partially visible under the seat in front of her, a handcrafted leather backpack that had been a gift from her father. "That bag looks oversized," Vanessa declared. "It needs to go in the overhead compartment." "It fits completely under the seat," Zoe pointed out. "And I need access to my engineering notes." "It's a safety violation," Vanessa insisted, reaching down to grab the bag without permission. "Please don't touch my property," Zoe said firmly, her hand shooting out to grasp the strap. My engineering prototype is fragile. But Vanessa had already yanked the bag, initiating a brief tug-of-war that ended when Tyler deliberately extended his foot into the aisle, causing Zoe to trip slightly and lose her grip. The backpack flew from both their hands, hitting the floor with enough force that the clasp broke open, spilling contents across the aisle, notebooks, pencils, and most importantly, Zoe's detailed aviation engineering designs and a small 3D printed prototype of her new oxygen mask system. Gabriella gasped softly beside her. From the corner of her eye, Zoe noticed her discreetly pulling out her phone and beginning to record. "Look what you've done," Vanessa accused loudly, making no move to help collect the scattered items. Zoe knelt in the aisle, quickly gathering her precious designs before they could be damaged. Tyler and two friends seated nearby began laughing, one of them taking photos of Zoe on the floor. "What are these supposed to be anyway?" Vanessa asked, picking up one of Zoe's technical drawings with obvious disdain. "Cute little doodles." "Those are patent-pending aircraft safety improvements," Zoe explained, trying to keep her voice steady as she reached for the paper. "Please be careful with them." Vanessa held the drawing away from Zoe's reach, examining it with exaggerated skepticism. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England." She laughed derisively, crumpling the corner of the paper as she finally handed it back. Zoe felt a stab of real anger for the first time. Those designs represented hundreds of hours of work, calculations that could potentially save lives in emergency situations. She'd stayed up countless nights perfecting them, and watching Vanessa treat them with such contempt broke something in her usually unflappable demeanor. "These designs are being reviewed by Boeing next month," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They could change how emergency oxygen is deployed on every commercial aircraft in the world." Tyler's laughter grew louder. "Yeah, right. And my dad owns Microsoft. I don't care if these are coloring book pages or the plans for a rocket ship," Vanessa said dismissively. "The point is you've created a mess and a disruption." As Zoe finished collecting her belongings, she noticed her unanswered text from Diana still glowing on her phone screen. She quickly typed, "Need help," before slipping the device into her pocket. The situation was escalating beyond what she wanted to handle alone. "I apologize for the disruption," Zoe said formally, channeling her father's boardroom voice. "But I must point out that this situation arose because you attempted to take my properly stowed personal item without consent." Several passengers nearby murmured in agreement, having witnessed the entire interaction. The tide of public opinion was beginning to turn, and Vanessa could sense it. Vanessa's face flushed with anger as she realized she was losing control of the situation. Passengers were whispering, some openly staring at her with disapproval. Her authority was being questioned, and in her mind, it was all because of this stubborn teenage girl who refused to know her place. "Listen here," Vanessa said, her voice rising to address not just Zoe but the surrounding passengers. "I've been a flight attendant for 12 years. Every day I deal with entitled passengers who think the rules don't apply to them, who don't respect our authority or understand that we're here primarily for safety, not to be your servants." Zoe stood perfectly still, her expression neutral despite the public dressing down. Years of being the only black girl in predominantly white spaces had taught her this skill, showing neither fear nor anger, even when both emotions churned inside her. "I understand your position is challenging," Zoe responded calmly. "But I'm simply requesting the same respect and service provided to other passengers." Connor Anderson had awakened during the commotion and now spoke up. "The young lady is right. I've been watching how differently you've treated her all flight." Other voices joined in. "She hasn't done anything wrong," said an elderly woman 3 rows back. "You've been singling her out," added a college student across the aisle. Vanessa's posture stiffened as she felt herself losing control of the cabin. "This is not a democracy," she snapped. "Aircraft safety and protocol are my responsibility, not something we vote on." "Speaking of aircraft safety," Zoe said quietly, reaching into her bag and retrieving the small 3D printed prototype, "this is the oxygen mask deployment system I designed. It addresses the 34% failure rate of current systems and provides 26% more oxygen flow in the critical first 90 seconds of deployment. The specificity of her explanation caused several passengers to look at the prototype with genuine interest. MIT's aerospace department is implementing it in their simulator next month, Zoe continued. And as I mentioned, Boeing has expressed interest. Vanessa's face contorted with disbelief. You expect me to believe that a teenager designed an aerospace system that Boeing is considering? Do you think I'm stupid? I don't think you're stupid, Zoe replied evenly. I think you're making assumptions about me based on my age and race rather than treating me as an individual. The cabin grew eerily quiet. Vanessa's face flushed deeper, now a dangerous shade of crimson. Let me see your ID, she demanded. Zoe pulled out her phone and displayed her MIT acceptance letter for the special engineering program, along with her student credentials. My name is Zoe Washington. I've been designing aircraft systems since I was 14. My oxygen mask system won the National Young Engineers competition last year. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Vanessa's face, quickly replaced by hardened skepticism. Washington? Like you're related to Lawrence Washington, she scoffed. Next you'll tell me you're a billionaire's daughter taking economy class for fun. The irony of the statement hung in the air, though only Zoe recognized it for what it was, the literal truth. My family background isn't relevant, Zoe said. What matters is that I'm a passenger on this flight who deserves basic courtesy. It was the wrong thing to say. In Vanessa's mind, Zoe had just admitted to lying about her identity, confirming her suspicions that this teenager was nothing but a troublemaker seeking attention. That's it, Vanessa declared. I've had enough of your attitude and your lies and your disruption of this flight. She stepped closer to Zoe, invading her personal space. You are just another privileged black brat who thinks the world owes you special treatment. The racial slur electrified the cabin. Gasps echoed through the rows. Gabriella's phone recorded steadily. Connor half rose from his seat in protest. Zoe stood her ground, her voice level despite the insult. That comment was inappropriate and racist. I'd like to speak to your supervisor immediately. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, when viewed in the viral videos, analysts would slow the footage to half speed to capture the sequence of events. Vanessa's right hand swung upward and outward in a swift arc, connecting with Zoe's left cheek with enough force that the teenager's head snapped to the side. The sound of the slap cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Absolute silence followed. Not a cough, not a whisper, not even the sound of breathing as every passenger and crew member processed what they had just witnessed, a uniformed airline employee physically assaulting a 17-year-old passenger. Zoe slowly straightened, her hand rising to her face where an angry red handprint was already forming. A small trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth where her lip had caught against her teeth during the impact. Without raising her voice, without showing anger, without losing the composure her parents had instilled in her, Zoe removed her phone from her pocket and pressed a single contact. Daddy, she said clearly into the phone as Vanessa watched with widening eyes. By this airline. Now. In that moment, from the front of the plane, Diana appeared, moving with the efficient purpose of her military background. She had received Zoe's text and was responding with controlled urgency. Ms. Washington, she said formally, ignoring Vanessa completely and addressing Zoe directly. Are you all right? The use of Zoe's surname caused Michael Torres, the other flight attendant who had been watching the situation unfold from a distance, to inhale sharply in recognition. His face drained of color as he approached Vanessa and whispered urgently in her ear. Washington, like Washington Technologies. Oh God, Vanessa, do you know what you've done? Before Vanessa could respond, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to an incident in the cabin, we will be making an emergency landing at Denver International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival. As the announcement concluded, Vanessa stood frozen in place, the first inkling of fear replacing her previous confidence as she looked at the composed young woman with new eyes, suddenly seeing not just a teenage girl, but potentially the daughter of one of the most powerful men in America. And she had just slapped her across the face. What would you do if you witnessed such blatant discrimination and violence on a flight? Comment number 1 if you think the flight attendant should be immediately fired, or number 2 if you believe she deserves a chance to learn from this incident. Hit that like button if you're amazed by Zoe's composure in the face of such treatment, and subscribe to see how justice unfolds in this situation. Do you think Zoe's father will really buy the airline? Let's find out what happens next. The descent into Denver was the tensest 30 minutes many passengers had ever experienced on a commercial flight. The cabin remained eerily silent except for occasional whispers and the constant chime of phones as passengers texted loved ones or, in many cases, posted snippets of video to social media. Vanessa had retreated to the forward galley, her face ashen. Michael Torres had taken over her duties, apologizing quietly to Zoe and ensuring she had ice for her swelling cheek. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Washington," he whispered. "I should have intervened sooner." Zoe merely nodded, holding the ice pack Diana had procured against her face. She was texting rapidly with her father, who was, by all accounts, livid. As the plane touched down at Denver International, Zoe could see through the window what awaited them: 3 police cars, an ambulance, and what appeared to be an airline management team in business attire standing nervously on the tarmac. "The videos are already trending," Diana informed Zoe quietly. "Your father's team is handling the PR response." The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely in Denver. Please remain seated until further instructions. We apologize for the inconvenience to your travel plans." When the aircraft reached the gate, the door opened to reveal not the usual ground crew but a team of airport security officers. They boarded swiftly, moving directly toward Zoe's row based on information they'd received. Vanessa, seeing the officers approach, stepped forward with the last remnants of her authority. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. This passenger," she pointed at Zoe, "has been disruptive and needs to be removed from the aircraft." The lead security officer looked confused, consulting his tablet. "We received reports of an assault on a minor passenger by a crew member." "That's absurd," Vanessa began, but Diana cut her off by standing and presenting her credentials. "My name is Diana Chen, personal assistant to the Washington family. This is Zoe Washington, daughter of Lawrence Washington, CEO of Washington Technologies." She was physically assaulted by this flight attendant, an incident witnessed by dozens of passengers and recorded on multiple devices. The security officer's eyebrows shot up in recognition of the name. Meanwhile, through the windows, passengers could see a growing media presence on the tarmac, news vans with satellite dishes extending skyward. "How did they get here so fast?" someone whispered. "Are you kidding? #flight attendant slap is already trending nationwide," another passenger replied, holding up their phone to show a social media feed exploding with video clips and outraged comments. Vanessa's face had gone from ashen to gray. "Washington, as in Lawrence Washington? The tech billionaire?" No one bothered to answer her as airline executives began boarding the plane, led by a distinguished man in his 60s who was clearly in a state of barely controlled panic. "I'm Richard Daniels, CEO of Coastal Airways," he announced tensely. "We're addressing this situation with the utmost seriousness." His eyes scanned the cabin until they found Zoe, and the visible handprint on her face caused him to wince noticeably. "Ms. Washington, on behalf of Coastal Airways, I want to express our deepest..." He was interrupted by the arrival of 3 impeccably dressed individuals pushing through the gathered executives. Their tailored suits and purposeful demeanor identified them immediately as high-powered attorneys. "Ms. Washington will not be accepting any statements at this time," the lead attorney announced. "I'm Jennifer Ramirez, Chief Counsel for Washington Technologies. Any communication regarding this incident should be directed through our office." By now, Tyler and his friends had shrunk into their seats, their earlier mockery replaced by shock as they frantically deleted social media posts and photos from their phones. "Oh God," Tyler muttered. "My dad's company does business with Washington Technologies." Gabriella stood up beside Zoe. "I have the entire incident recorded," she said, holding up her phone. "Including the racial slur and the assault. I'm happy to provide this as evidence." Connor Anderson joined her. "I witnessed the pattern of discriminatory treatment throughout the flight and am willing to provide a statement." As the situation unfolded, passengers began to murmur about Lawrence Washington's existing interest in Coastal Airways. One business traveler pulled up a financial news site on his tablet. "Says here Washington Technologies was already in preliminary talks to acquire Coastal as part of their Transportation Innovation Initiative," he announced to those nearby. Stock was up 2% on rumors last week. Vanessa, hearing this, seemed to physically deflate as she finally grasped the full magnitude of her actions. She hadn't just assaulted a random teenager, she had struck the daughter of a man who was already positioned to become her boss, and who now had every reason to dismantle the entire airline in retribution. Richard Daniels was attempting damage control, offering to rebook all passengers on alternative flights with full compensation, when a commotion at the aircraft door drew everyone's attention. Lawrence Washington, 6'3" and commanding in a custom suit despite having clearly rushed from elsewhere, strode onto the plane with the force of a gathering storm. His security detail flanked him, but it was unnecessary, his presence alone parted the crowd of executives and crew members. His eyes locked immediately on his daughter, noting the ice pack, the swelling, the small trace of dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Something dangerous flashed across his expression before he controlled it. He reached Zoe in 4 long strides, gently tilting her face to examine the injury before pulling her into a protective embrace. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his deep voice carrying in the hushed cabin. "I'm fine, Dad," Zoe assured him, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed that her legendary composure was finally beginning to crack now that her father had arrived. Lawrence turned to face Richard Daniels, his expression hardening. "Mr. Daniels, I believe we had a meeting scheduled next week to discuss my company's potential investment in Coastal Airways." The airline's CEO nodded nervously. "That meeting will now happen immediately, after my daughter receives medical attention," Lawrence continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "And the terms have significantly changed." He glanced toward Vanessa, who seemed to physically shrink under his gaze. "As for the employee who assaulted my daughter, I expect her immediate suspension pending full termination proceedings." "Of course, Mr. Washington," Daniels responded quickly. "We're already initiating, that's not all," Lawrence cut him off. "My legal team will be pursuing both criminal charges for assault on a minor and a civil rights case based on a clear pattern of racial discrimination my daughter experienced." As if on cue, Jennifer Ramirez stepped forward with a tablet. "We've already collected 16 witness statements and 9 video recordings documenting the discriminatory treatment and assault. We'll be filing formal complaints with the FAA, EEOC, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division within the hour." Outside the plane, the media presence had doubled, with reporters broadcasting live from the tarmac. The airline stock had already dropped 8% in the 30 minutes since the first videos hit social media, and Washington Technologies stock was climbing as investors anticipated Lawrence's response. In the stunned silence that followed, it was Zoe who spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. "Dad, I'd like to speak with you privately before any decisions are made." Lawrence looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. Even now, facing discrimination and assault, she was thinking strategically rather than reactively, a quality that reminded him so much of her mother. "Of course," he agreed. "Let's get you checked by a doctor first." As Lawrence escorted Zoe toward the exit, passengers spontaneously began to applaud, not just for the billionaire's swift response, but for his daughter's extraordinary dignity throughout the ordeal. Vanessa watched them leave, the full weight of her actions finally sinking in. In less than 6 hours, she had destroyed her career, exposed her airline to massive liability, and provided the world with a viral case study in racial discrimination, all because she couldn't see past her own biases to recognize the remarkable young woman in seat 24B. And as the Washington family departed, accompanied by executives, lawyers, and security personnel, one thing became abundantly clear to everyone who had witnessed the incident: this wasn't just about one flight attendant's actions or one airline's policies. This was about to become a watershed moment for how the entire industry addressed discrimination. Within hours of the plane landing in Denver, #JusticeForZoe was trending nationwide. Major news networks ran the story as their lead, showing carefully edited versions of the viral videos that captured Vanessa's discriminatory behavior and the shocking moment of the slap. Zoe received medical attention for her injuries, a split lip and facial bruising, while Lawrence Washington and his team set up temporary headquarters in a private suite at Denver's Airport Marriott. What had begun as a routine business trip had transformed into a full-scale corporate and legal operation. Washington Technology's stock rose 7% by closing bell as investors responded to Lawrence's decisive handling of the situation. Conversely, Coastal Airways stock plummeted nearly 20%, triggering trading circuit breakers twice during the day. In the executive suite, Lawrence reviewed medical reports with barely contained fury. The doctor confirmed facial contusions and soft tissue damage, he told his legal team. "I want the maximum penalties pursued." Jennifer Ramirez nodded, updating her notes. "We have grounds for criminal assault charges, civil rights violations, and a substantial civil lawsuit. The evidence is overwhelming." While the legal team strategized, Zoe sat quietly by the window, watching planes take off and land with the analytical eye of an engineer. Despite everything, she hadn't lost her passion for aviation. "Dad," she finally said, turning from the window. "I'd like to be involved in whatever decisions you make about Coastal Airways." Lawrence looked at his daughter with a mixture of concern and pride. Most teenagers would be traumatized, emotional, perhaps wanting nothing more than to go home and forget the experience. But Zoe, even with her face still swollen, was thinking about the bigger picture. "Of course," he agreed. "This affects you more than anyone." Meanwhile, at Coastal Airways headquarters, emergency board meetings stretched into the night. Richard Daniels faced the grim task of damage control for what was rapidly becoming the biggest PR disaster in the company's history. "Vanessa Carpenter has been placed on administrative leave pending termination," he informed the board. "We've issued a public apology and are cooperating fully with authorities." "That's not enough," responded the head of investor relations. "Washington was already considering acquiring us. Now he could dismantle the entire airline out of retribution." Social media continued to explode with reactions. Video clips from the flight had been viewed over 50 million times. Celebrities and public figures weighed in, most expressing outrage and support for Zoe. Civil rights organizations called for industry-wide reviews of discrimination in air travel. Tyler Brooks, the teenager who had mocked Zoe throughout the flight, was identified by internet sleuths within hours. His private school issued a statement distancing themselves from his behavior, and his father's company, a tech firm with business ties to Washington Technologies, placed him on forced leave while they assessed the potential fallout. By morning, news vans surrounded both the hotel where the Washingtons were staying and Coastal Airways headquarters. In a particularly ironic twist, Vanessa Carpenter's neighborhood was also identified, leading reporters to camp outside her home for statements. One reporter managed to catch her briefly as she hurried to her car, wearing sunglasses and a hat for disguise. "Ms. Carpenter, do you regret your actions on the flight?" "No comment," she replied tensely, rushing past. "Were you aware that Zoe Washington is the daughter of billionaire Lawrence Washington?" This question stopped Vanessa in her tracks. She turned to the camera, momentarily removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes reddened from crying. "How was I supposed to know that?" she asked, her voice cracking. She was sitting in economy. She looked like any other teenager. The clip went viral within minutes, with commentators pointing out the implicit bias in her statement, the assumption that a young black woman couldn't possibly be connected to wealth or power unless she was displaying it overtly. Back at the hotel, Zoe watched the clip on her tablet, her expression thoughtful rather than vindictive. "She still doesn't understand," she told Diana. "She thinks the problem was not recognizing who I was, not how she treated me." Diana nodded solemnly. "That's often how privilege works. They only see the mistake in hindsight, not the underlying prejudice." Lawrence entered the suite with his executive team, their expressions indicating significant news. "The Coastal Airways board has reached out," he announced. "They're not just open to acquisition anymore, they're practically begging for it. Their stock is in freefall, and they're facing potential bankruptcy from the PR disaster alone." Jennifer Ramirez added, "They're offering a 30% discount on the valuation we discussed last week, immediate leadership changes, and full compliance with any conditions we set for the acquisition." Lawrence turned to Zoe. "This is where you come in. I promised you'd be part of this decision." Zoe was silent for a moment, considering the situation from all angles, not just as the victim of discrimination, but as a future business leader and an engineer who still believed in improving air travel. "I don't want revenge, Dad," she finally said. "I want change." Those 4 words would become the foundation for what industry analysts would later call the Washington Reformation of commercial aviation. While Zoe recovered from her physical injuries, she worked with her father and his team to develop a comprehensive proposal that went far beyond punishing one flight attendant or acquiring one airline. Michael Torres, the flight attendant who had witnessed the discrimination but failed to intervene until too late, reached out through proper channels to express his remorse. "I knew what was happening was wrong," he wrote in an email that Zoe read carefully. "But I was afraid of losing my job if I challenged a senior colleague. I'll regret my inaction for the rest of my career." Rather than dismissing his apology, Zoe added his name to a growing list of people she wanted to meet with personally. Gabriela Rodriguez, whose video evidence had proven crucial, received a personal call from Lawrence Washington. "Your courage in documenting what happened to my daughter may help thousands of other passengers who face similar discrimination," he told her. "We'd like to fly you to Denver to discuss how you might be involved in our next steps." Connor Anderson similarly received an invitation, his willingness to speak up as a bystander representing exactly the kind of allyship Zoe believed was essential for real change. Meanwhile, a different kind of aftermath was unfolding for Tyler Brooks. His school suspended him pending an investigation into his behavior on the flight, and the video evidence of him mocking Zoe and intentionally tripping her had made him a social pariah overnight. His father's company lost a major contract with Washington Technologies, and his family received angry messages from strangers who had seen the videos. For the first time in his privileged life, Tyler was experiencing consequences for his actions, a harsh but perhaps necessary lesson at 16. As the legal proceedings against Vanessa and Coastal Airways took shape, a surprising development occurred 7 days after the incident. Zoe requested a private meeting with her father and the airline executives. "Before we proceed with litigation and acquisition," she said with the poise of someone twice her age, "I want to discuss an alternative approach." The executives exchanged nervous glances, but Lawrence Washington smiled slightly, already having discussed his daughter's idea privately. "Go ahead, Zoe," he encouraged. "The floor is yours." What she proposed would transform not just one airline's policies, but set new standards for the entire industry's approach to discrimination, staff training, and passenger rights. And it all began with 4 simple words from a 17-year-old engineering prodigy: "I don't want revenge." 10 days after the incident, Lawrence Washington called a press conference at Washington Technologies headquarters in San Francisco. The media speculation had reached fever pitch, with rumors ranging from a complete shutdown of Coastal Airways to a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. What no one expected was for Zoe to take the podium first, the fading bruise on her cheek a visible reminder of what had precipitated this moment. She wore a professional blazer over a simple blouse, looking every bit the future business leader despite her youth. 10 days ago, I boarded a flight as a researcher, hoping to understand how to improve the passenger experience through engineering, she began, her voice steady. Instead, I received a first-hand lesson in how discrimination persists in everyday interactions, even in spaces where everyone should be treated equally. The room fell silent as she recounted her experience clinically, without embellishment or emotional appeal. The facts alone were powerful enough. My father and our legal team have outlined several paths forward, she continued. Criminal charges against the flight attendant who assaulted me. A civil rights lawsuit against the airline. A complete acquisition and restructuring of Coastal Airways. She paused, looking directly into the cameras. I've chosen a different path. Lawrence stepped forward to stand beside his daughter, a gesture of solidarity and support. Today, we're announcing the formation of the Washington Aviation Equity Initiative, Zoe revealed. Rather than simply punishing individuals or acquiring one airline, we're establishing industry-wide standards for anti-discrimination training, accountability, and passenger rights. Lawrence took the microphone. Washington Technologies will acquire a controlling interest in Coastal Airways, but with a unique condition: the airline will become a test case for these new standards, with transparent reporting and third-party oversight. What followed was an outline of the comprehensive program Zoe had developed with input from civil rights experts, aviation professionals, and passenger advocacy groups. Mandatory bias recognition training for all staff, anonymous reporting systems for passengers who experience discrimination, body cameras for flight attendants, with footage reviewable in case of complaints, diverse hiring practices at all levels of airline operations, quarterly public reporting on discrimination complaints and resolutions, independent review board with representation from civil rights organizations. Additionally, Zoe added, returning to the microphone, we're establishing a scholarship fund for young black engineers interested in aviation, ensuring the industry's future leaders reflect diverse perspectives and experiences. The press room erupted with questions, but Lawrence held up his hand for silence. There's one more announcement, he said. We've made a decision regarding Vanessa Carpenter, the flight attendant involved in this incident. The room grew tense with anticipation. Many expected a declaration of legal warfare. Ms. Carpenter has been terminated from Coastal Airways, Lawrence confirmed. However, at my daughter's request, we will not be pursuing criminal charges if she agrees to participate in a restorative justice program. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the audience. Zoe explained, punishment alone doesn't create change. Ms. Carpenter has an opportunity to understand the impact of her actions and contribute to preventing similar incidents in the future. After the press conference, behind closed doors, the real work began. Zoe met with airline executives, civil rights attorneys, and education specialists to develop the training programs she envisioned. Despite her youth, she commanded respect through her intelligence, composure, and clear vision. Richard Daniels, still CEO of Coastal Airways but now reporting to a board controlled by Washington Technologies, marveled at the transformation. We expected to be dismantled or sued into bankruptcy, he admitted to Lawrence during a private meeting. Instead, your daughter has given us a blueprint for becoming industry leaders in equity and service. Lawrence nodded. Zoe sees opportunities where others see only problems. It's why she'll be a better CEO than I ever was when her time comes. Meanwhile, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology reached out with an unprecedented offer. They wanted to feature Zoe's aircraft designs in a special exhibition on innovation in aviation safety. The oxygen mask system that Vanessa had mockingly called "cute little doodles" was now being hailed as a potential breakthrough in emergency response systems. The invitation came with a note from the Dean of Engineering: your technical innovations are impressive, Ms. Washington, but your leadership in transforming a personal injustice into systemic improvement demonstrates the kind of engineer and human being we aspire to educate at MIT. Zoe accepted the invitation but requested that the exhibition include a section on transportation equity and accessibility, ensuring that the conversation extended beyond technical innovations to the human experience of travel. As plans for the Washington Aviation Equity Initiative developed, Zoe made a surprising request. she wanted to personally lead the first training session for Coastal Airways staff. Her father was concerned about the emotional toll, but Zoe was adamant. "They need to hear directly from me," she insisted. "Not as a victim, but as a leader with a vision for change." The session was scheduled for the following month, giving Zoe time to complete her MIT summer program, which she insisted on attending despite Lawrence's offer to defer it until the next year. "Life doesn't stop because of one bad experience, Dad," she told him with the wisdom that continued to surprise even those who knew her best. "Besides, I still have planes to redesign." As news of the initiative spread, civil rights leaders reached out to offer support and collaboration. Gabriela Rodriguez was hired as a community liaison for the program, her background in education making her ideal for developing cultural competency materials. Connor Anderson, inspired by his experience on the flight, initiated a diversity review at his own investment firm and became a vocal advocate for bystander intervention training in corporate America. Even Michael Torres found a path to redemption, accepting a role in developing protocols for airline staff to safely intervene when witnessing discrimination. The most unexpected response came from Tyler Brooks. After his suspension and social media shaming, the teenager sent a handwritten letter to Zoe. "I've never had to face consequences for how I treat people before," he wrote. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to learn how to be better." Zoe read the letter twice before adding it to her growing file of correspondence related to the incident. Tyler's name joined the list of people she planned to meet with personally, not out of obligation to forgive, but from a strategic understanding that lasting change required engaging even those who had caused harm. 3 weeks after the incident, as Zoe prepared to leave for MIT, Lawrence found her in her bedroom, packing the same backpack that had been at the center of the confrontation with Vanessa. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked gently. "No one would blame you for taking some time." Zoe carefully placed her redesigned oxygen mask prototype in the bag. She had refined it further since the incident, channeling her experience into even more intuitive emergency response systems. "Dad," she said with quiet determination, "what happened on that plane wasn't just about me. It happens to people without our resources or platform every day. The difference is, I can actually do something about it." Lawrence embraced his daughter, recognizing in her the perfect blend of her mother's principled compassion and his own strategic vision. "You already are," he assured her. As the Washington Aviation Equity Initiative took shape, industry analysts predicted it would set new standards not just for airlines but for transportation services globally. What had begun as a shocking act of discrimination was transforming into a catalyst for systemic change, all because a 17-year-old engineer had decided to respond not with vengeance, but with vision. 1 year later, the aviation industry had undergone a remarkable transformation that few could have predicted. The former Coastal Airways, now rebranded as Washington Airways, had become the gold standard for both passenger experience and workplace equity. Zoe Washington, now 18 and completing her freshman year at MIT while serving on the airline's board of directors, stood in the aisle of the showcase aircraft during its media tour. The plane featured all of her safety innovations, from the redesigned oxygen masks to more intuitive emergency lighting systems and enhanced accessibility features. "This aircraft represents our commitment to both safety and dignity," she explained to the assembled journalists. "Every innovation was designed with 2 questions in mind: will it keep passengers safer? And will it treat them with respect regardless of who they are?" The transformation went far beyond technical improvements. Washington Airways now boasted the most diverse executive team in the industry, with people of color representing 60% of leadership positions. The comprehensive anti-discrimination training program developed by Zoe's team had been so successful that 5 other major airlines had licensed it for their own staff. Every flight attendant now wore a small, discreet body camera, activated only during passenger interactions and with strict privacy protocols. The policy had resulted in a 93% reduction in passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment and protected staff from false accusations. Perhaps most significantly, the Washington Aviation Equity Initiative had established an industry-wide reporting system for discrimination incidents, creating accountability across all airlines rather than isolated within each company. In a quiet corner of the aircraft gallery, away from the media spotlight, a more personal transformation was taking place. Vanessa Carpenter, no longer employed in aviation but now working with a civil rights education organization, stood face-to-face with Zoe for the first time since the incident. The meeting had been arranged as part of the restorative justice program Zoe had insisted upon instead of criminal charges. Vanessa had spent the past year completing anti-bias training, community service with youth organizations, and regular sessions with a therapist specializing in implicit bias. "I didn't expect you to agree to see me," Vanessa said quietly, her demeanor vastly different from the confrontational flight attendant of a year ago. "Transformation requires engagement from all parties," Zoe replied simply. "Including those who caused harm." Their conversation was private, but witnesses noted that both women spoke earnestly, occasionally nodding in understanding, and concluded their meeting with a respectful handshake rather than artificial embrace. It wasn't about forgiveness as much as mutual recognition of how systems change through individual accountability. Elsewhere in the country, Tyler Brooks was completing his court-mandated community service at an aviation program for underprivileged youth in Los Angeles. The teenager who had once mocked Zoe's engineering drawings was now assisting young people of color in building their own model aircraft, a humbling experience that was gradually reshaping his understanding of privilege and respect. Michael Torres had found unexpected purpose in his new role as head of Washington Airways Staff Cultural Competency Department. His first-hand experience with the consequences of bystanding had transformed him into a powerful advocate for intervention training. "The most dangerous words in aviation aren't emergency landing," he often told new employees. It's not my problem. When we see discrimination and remain silent, we become part of the problem." Gabriela Rodriguez stood proudly at a ceremony in Miami, watching her daughter Isabella receive the first Washington Aviation Scholarship for young women of color interested in aerospace careers. The full-ride scholarship would cover Isabella's education through graduate school, opening doors that had previously seemed firmly closed. "Your video evidence didn't just help one person," Zoe told Gabriela during the ceremony. "It created opportunity for countless others." Connor Anderson had taken the lessons from that fateful flight back to his investment firm, where he now led a diversity initiative that had transformed hiring practices and workplace culture. His willingness to speak up as an ally had evolved into a commitment to using his privilege to create systemic change. At Washington Technology's headquarters, Lawrence Washington reviewed the quarterly reports from Washington Airways with satisfaction. The airline that had once been struggling financially was now the fastest-growing carrier in the market, with customer satisfaction ratings that consistently outperformed competitors. "The best revenge is success," he mused to his executive team. "And the best success creates opportunity for others." The transformation extended beyond one company or even one industry. The Washington case had become a Harvard Business School study on crisis response and ethical leadership. Civil rights organizations cited it as an example of how corporate accountability could drive meaningful change. Transportation equity had entered the national conversation in ways previously unimagined. Boarding a Washington Airways flight had become a distinctly different experience. The diverse crew greeted each passenger with the same warm respect. The safety demonstrations included Zoe's innovations, now being adopted industry-wide. The airline's new mission statement was subtly incorporated throughout the experience. "At Washington Airways, everyone soars with dignity." 1 year to the day after the incident, Zoe Washington delivered the commencement address at the new Washington Aviation Academy, a technical school established to create pathways into aviation careers for underrepresented communities. Standing at the podium, looking out at the diverse faces of the inaugural graduating class, Zoe reflected on the journey that had brought her there. "A year ago, I experienced firsthand how discrimination can make spaces unsafe and unwelcoming," she told the graduates. "I had a choice then, to seek punishment or to create change. I chose change, not because it was easier, but because it was necessary." She gestured to the academy around them, the visible manifestation of turning pain into progress. Each of you represents the transformation we need in aviation and beyond. You bring perspectives, experiences, and innovations that will make air travel safer, more equitable, and more accessible for everyone. As the graduates tossed their caps into the air, Lawrence Washington watched his daughter with immeasurable pride. In 1 year, she had transformed a moment of trauma into an industry revolution, never losing sight of either her engineering brilliance or her moral compass. The final scene of the transformation played out aboard the inaugural transcontinental flight of Washington Airways' new fleet. Zoe sat in economy class, by choice, still committed to experiencing air travel as most passengers did, working on schematics for her next innovation. The diverse flight crew moved through the cabin with professional courtesy that was identical for every passenger regardless of appearance, accent, or seating assignment. When the captain's voice came over the intercom, her words reflected the new reality that one determined teenager had helped create: "Welcome aboard Washington Airways, where everyone soars with dignity." As the plane ascended into the clouds, Zoe looked out the window at the expanding horizon. The transformation wasn't complete, real change never was. It required constant vigilance, accountability, and commitment. But she had created a blueprint for turning injustice into improvement, discrimination into opportunity, and a single slap into a wake-up call heard around the world. What do you think would have happened if Zoe had chosen revenge instead of transformation? Would you have had the strength to turn such a painful experience into positive change? Comment below with your thoughts on how discrimination in public spaces should be addressed. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of justice and transformation, and share this video with someone who needs to understand the power of responding to hate with vision rather than vengeance. Thank you for watching, and remember, the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger, but action that creates lasting change. Zoe's story teaches us that true power comes not from seeking revenge, but from creating meaningful change. When faced with discrimination, she chose to transform an entire industry rather than simply punish one person. This demonstrates how responding to injustice with vision rather than vengeance can create lasting impact. The incident highlights how racism persists in everyday interactions, even in spaces where everyone should be treated equally. It shows that wealth and status don't shield people of color from discrimination. Vanessa didn't see Zoe as a brilliant engineer or a billionaire's daughter, but simply as another black brat. Most importantly, the story reveals how systems change, through accountability, education, and leadership. By establishing industry-wide standards, creating educational opportunities, and demanding transparency, Zoe transformed a personal trauma into collective progress. Her approach reminds us that addressing racism requires both individual responsibility and structural reform. True justice isn't about punishment alone, it's about creating a world where dignity is afforded to everyone regardless of their appearance, background, or circumstance. What would you do if faced with discrimination like Zoe experienced? Would you have her strength to choose transformation over revenge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling, what happened and how was it addressed? Don't forget to hit that like button if this story inspired you, subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and resilience, and share this video with someone who needs to understand how responding to hate with vision creates more meaningful change than responding with anger. Thank you for watching, and remember, in a world that sometimes tries to diminish your worth, stand tall like Zoe and use your voice to create the change you wish to see.